Welcome. We're excited to be here today. Thanks for spending some time with us this afternoon. We're going to be talking about adopting and implementing new curricular resources. I'm Kelly Van Setters. I'm a math consultant for Kent ISD, and we'll just take a minute to introduce ourselves before going through.
Hi, I'm Mary Johnson. I work at Muskegon Area ISD. I'm an ELA consultant and coaching coordinator. Welcome.
Hi everyone, I'm Erica Rodriguez-Hatt. I work at Washtenaw ISD, and I am an early literacy and literacy coaching initiatives coordinator there.
I'm Marcus DJ. I'm a math consultant in Kent County, so Grand Rapids area.
So, as we know, the last few years, we've had a lot of ESSER funds COVID money coming into districts, and we've had a lot of new resources being implemented. We're here today to share a little bit about the process that we've found to be successful. And as we go throughout this hour and a half-ish now together, know that we're going to be talking across literacy and math, and there's some nuances to that. So if things come up and we have questions, but it doesn't feel like the right moment, we did post a parking lot, and we'll be sure to take a few moments at the end to address those questions. We do have representatives from math and literacy, which is nice as we go through. So Marcus and I are going to be taking us through the first portion, and then Mary and Erica will hop in towards the end. Okay, thanks for being here.
So we're going to pack a lot into a really short time. We probably could take 4 or 5 hours minimally to go through the process. So know that we're doing our best to synthesize and give the major steps, but each one of these steps is going to have a nuance to it, and we'll try to share some context about what we've learned in doing this through several different places. But as you can see, we're focusing on the vision, the process, and hopefully leaving you with some resources that might support you outside of today's learning. So the outcomes involve these 3 things. We find that in working with districts and a lot of places across the state, we had a lot of learning to do around what is curriculum. When we say curriculum, we really need to have the same understanding. So we're going to have a short read to help us be all on the same page around what is meant by the word curriculum. There are not 7 steps specifically. We chose 7 steps in synthesizing multiple different frameworks to share with you all. And then lastly, there are more resources to continue to learn outside of today. Kelly, I think we're going to have to keep handing this.
Yeah, it's fine. It is what it is. So first, we'll take a moment for an inclusion activity. I'll invite you to read the acronym SCARF on the screen. In the back, can you read that okay? Okay. As we consider those categories, am I valuable? Do I know where I stand? I belong? Am I treated with respect? Consider how this might relate to adopting new materials. How does this relate to adopting new instructional materials? And when you're ready, it's a little tight in here, but just stand and talk. When you're ready, talk with an elbow partner or just around your table. What does that mean to you, and where do you see this fitting in? Feel free to turn and talk when you're ready.
Are always apprehensive. Like, is this the new shiny thing, and how long is it going to be here? Or is it just right? Yeah, right.
When we think of adopting new instructional materials, that's a huge change. Let's elevate 2 or 3 of our ideas right now. Which ones are standing out to you? That might pop up when we're implementing new materials or selecting them. Relatedness and autonomy. Mm-hmm. Say more. How might that show up?
When something is just thrust upon someone, they resist.
Mm-hmm. 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 Resistance to change.
Yeah.
Sure.
We talked a lot about certainty at our table, is this just the new shiny thing and 3 years from now it's going to be gone? So how do I know that this is where we're headed?
Yeah. Dr. Resnick would call that a thinking trap for us, right? Oh, it's just that next new thing. It'll be gone in a couple of years. Sure.
One more.
Some of it might not be resistance, it might be pride in what you're doing and what you've done with kids. If you've been getting good results, it is hard to just be told, nope, scrap it.
Yeah, for sure. It's hard to make a change when you know that what you're doing is working. And that when we implement something new, that takes a little bit of a dip, right? We lose some of our efficacy, and we're worried about the results that we'll get because of that. Yeah, sure. Okay, thanks for speaking to those.
We can consider a number of the thinking traps as we go through the process. I appreciate you all surfacing your ideas, and we often think that during the adoption is the hard part. We make the decision and we want to shout for joy, but then it's really the hard work begins. It's after that adoption into the implementation. So for clarity and context of where we're coming into this space, you've heard from 4 of us that are representing 3 different ISDs, and much of the work that we're sharing is also from you all. For example, the math consultants across the state were asked, if you have a process or a framework that you use, please share those with us. So we've embedded a lot of different content into today. This is our best attempt as synthesizing this work. We each have gone through these experiences multiple times within our ISDs. So we're not experts, we have the experiences in a lot of different ways to learn, and this is our best attempt to convey some of this synthesized learning for you all. So these are a few of the resources that were considered in putting the content together for today. Okay. I'm sure you have others as well. So feel free to share those with colleagues at your table. And if you have others, could you actually put them on a Post-it and pop it on the parking lot so we can share that information with everybody in here? It's also worth mentioning, one of the documents that we're leaning heavily into is the Curriculum Support Guide. It's curriculumsupport.org. There's a nice framework, it's a nice structure, and it provides a lot of guidance for where we're going. Many of you are writing that down right now, but if you go to the end of your packet, the curriculum support image is there with the URL right underneath, so you don't need to write it down, just don't lose your packet. Okay? So the key questions, many of those will be coming from the Curriculum Support Guide specifically. Our job is to convey the steps and some of the nuances as we go through the process together. Okay? So those 7 steps, one of our outcomes for today is that we know what the 7 steps are. You can see that 5 are here on the left: plan, vision, vet, pilot, and select. After the selection takes place, then installing, implementing, and monitoring are also being considered. But you'll notice the organizational practice number 7, one of the highest leverage points that we have in districts and student learning is having a high quality resource, making sure that above anything else, our resource that we build off of and we continue to improve our teaching practices. Our teaching practices are so much more effective if we have a common curriculum to sit underneath us as our foundation. So these will be the steps we're going through today. So as we talked about, the other outcome for us is, what do we mean by curriculum? A lot of us think of standards, we think of activities, we think of who knows what, teaching practices perhaps. So we're going to take a short read from Mike Schmoker here, 2 pages in his Leading with Focus text. So if you want to find a packet on your tabletop, and we're going to read through the first 2 pages of that packet from Mike Schmoker with Leading with Focus. So please take a moment to read through those 2 pages and dialogue with someone next to you. What is standing out to you, or maybe what are some misconceptions around curriculum that might exist within your region or your district? So first we're going to read. Second, we're going to chat with a partner about connections we're seeing to the read. Enjoy.
So even down here when it says, I'm convinced that many of the teachers may now regard as ineffective could become highly effective at getting a decent.
Wonderful. So what were some things that you and your table talked about? What are some misconceptions that we have around curriculum, or what part of the read is standing out to you in your table? feel free to just share out.
So that last line stood out to me, and we didn't get to discuss it, but when it says, I'm convinced that many of the teachers we may now regard as ineffective could become highly effective if given a decent curriculum to work from on their first day of school.
Think about new teachers that come into our districts and the needs that they have. If they have a high quality resource that they can stand on, they have a great leg up at giving students that grade level content that they deserve. What else? Please.
So I'll just add, the paragraph right before that talks about the curriculum, and it says will be designed and modified over time by teachers at the school or district level. And really understand, I think a common misconception is that people think the textbook is the curriculum, and really understanding that there's so much more that goes into creating a comprehensive curriculum that's beyond just what the textbook says.
Yes, teaching is incredibly complex. And if we have a resource or quality resources to support us and make those smart decisions that are specific to our needs and our students' needs, as a system with quality tools, we're giving our students the best chance at success. So it's learning the tools, learning the resources that are available, and then making sure we're matching what our students' and teachers' needs are. Anything else we'd like to share from the reading or misconceptions? Okay. So now that we have a base knowledge of common understanding of curriculum, we're going to dive into some of those 7 steps, and Kelly's going to take us away.
As we jump into the first step here, which is plan, we want to keep in mind that although we can lay out these 7 steps and they look like a great roadmap, Rusty reminded us this morning that we're dealing with humans. We're in the business of humans. So as pretty as some of this might look and sound, the process is messy, right? We need to keep in mind, even the SCARF acronym. How are we managing the people side of this as we're moving through the structured process as well? So when we're considering planning, we want to identify the selection team. Who is your curriculum leadership team? We want to be sure we have some teachers, administrators, special ed, if you have coaches. Okay. Consider how many variety of experiences and expertise you can bring into that room that will be valuable. When we think about thinking traps, it's harder to fall into thinking traps when we have a variety of voices and a variety of experiences to draw upon. Okay. Determine how the final decision will be made. How many of us have been in meetings or situations before where we're like, okay, we're going to make this decision, but who and how and what, right? What is that process? Over communicate how that decision is going to be made and who is making it. Okay. That's important to lead to that certainty, okay, throughout the process. And map the schedule of events. We have to think through the 7 steps. We also have to think about subs. When is this taking place? What kind of funds do we have? What's our professional learning calendar look like next year? That's going to help support this new curriculum. Okay. Marcus, what might you add to that?
Something worth highlighting is this part can't be understated about how the decision is going to be made. Some districts give their teachers a week and say, here are the resources, here's what we're looking for. You're offering me a recommendation at the end of the week, and I'm making the final decision. Other districts have said, this will be a collaborative process. You're going to work together as a team throughout the 5 full days this year. Then you're going to bring me a recommendation, and then I will be able to offer the recommendation to the board. Still a curriculum director having that executive authority over the process. Other times, several years ago, there was another curriculum director who said, I trust my teachers, they're just going to go with it, whatever decision they come up with is just fine, and then I'm going to give them the autonomy and authority to present to the school board themselves. So it really has a question of who has the authority in the process, and we don't want any gotchas. Those are the worst parts of the adoption. So every meeting starts with how the decision is going to be made, especially that decision at the end, to make sure everyone has clarity. Trust is really big in this process, and the more certainty and the more trust we can have throughout the time together, the more effective the adoption process will be.
Thank you.
After we have our team together and we're meeting for the first time, the first few times, we want to think about our vision. We think about those organizational practices and how just recently they revised them to add values. Just like the values are the North Star and the way we bring those practices to life, the vision can act the same way. So as we're later vetting curriculum and thinking through things, we want to be sure we have a strong vision and a strong understanding of what we want math or literacy instruction to look and sound like, so that we know that what we're picking is going to get us there, okay, or get us close to there. And what are those core beliefs that support that vision and mission? Okay. So what do we believe about teaching and learning? What do we believe about kids? And what do we believe that we want to see in classrooms that supports that vision? When we're really clear about those two things, we can see further into the vetting process which curriculum might best bring those things to life.
Too many times. Do we get 2 or 3 days into the meeting? Too many times we get 2 or 3 days into the meetings, our second and third meeting, and teachers are looking at the resource, they're dissecting it, they're pulling out evidence from that resource, but we're looking in different spaces at different things. And then day 4 comes around and we try to make a decision and look at the data that we've gathered, and it is messy and there's no coherence in the direction that we're going. And often the question is asked, well, what's our North Star? What's driving us towards the same end goal? And it usually starts with this mission or the beliefs that we have around instruction. So this part is critically important as well. You all know that from your experience. We're all rowing in the same direction towards the same means, making sure the data that we're gathering is all in alignment towards that common piece. Okay.
Next comes the vetting process. And when we think of the vetting process, we want to think about what are those must-haves in the curriculum to bring that vision and those beliefs to life. What are some things that would be nice to have? Okay. When we think about the math world, it might be nice to have an intervention plan or a tier 2 plan that some math curriculums come along with. Okay. That's an example. How many instructional materials are being considered? When we think about a good number to dive deeper into, we want to think about 3 to 5. Okay. We want to try to narrow it down to 3 to 5 resources to dig deeper into and look more closely at. We'll talk a little bit more about how to select those in just a moment. And what do we need to learn about the rubrics and evaluation tools? The evaluation tools can tell you a lot about what the curriculum brings to life. Okay. What kind of questions are being asked? What kind of rubrics are there? Are they standards based? Are they different? Okay. That might look different between literacy and math.
In just a moment, we're going to give you some time to process with your table, but sharing a few different examples of ways that this has been done differently and the results of some of those might be helpful. So you'll notice that the key shifts for both ELA and literacy and mathematics, those are core foundational components of a high quality curriculum. For math, it's focus, coherence, and curriculum. So one approach that was used several years ago with the district, this is the same district that said, let's give teachers the authority to make the decision. Well, teachers have never heard of the focus, coherence, and rigor and what that meant and the importance that it has within a curriculum. So we had to take a lot of time to unpack, well, what is focus? What does it look like within a resource, and how do we find it? Same thing with coherence, same thing with rigor. We had to use a lot of tools. There was an immense amount of learning for the teachers. Quality learning, yes. Took a long time, however. So after we learned about focus, coherence, and rigor with those 3 key shifts, then there were rubrics. There were other tools that supported our process. We could either use the instructional materials evaluation tool, the IMET, but I believe with this group we use the equip rubric. Those are dense, they're heavy, they're hard to understand. So this group of teachers went through some really deep learning, focus, coherence, and rigor. They had to learn about this rubric and this tool, and they had to merge those things together to evaluate 2 or 3 resources they were looking at. It was a lot of cognitive work on their part. Another approach, and that group, they made their decision, but we found that because we were just learning about these things and we didn't have an in-depth knowledge of them, the data that we gathered through the rubrics also wasn't that effective. They had their mission in mind. They had their goal and the vision of where they were heading, but we really didn't know about the tools and we didn't understand the content well enough to find what we were looking for within the resource. The data was messy. So afterwards, other districts said, we don't want to go through that same process. Let's learn something different from this. So rather than spending time unpacking all of focus, coherence, and rigor, we said, what's most important about those three elements? Let's give teachers the base foundational knowledge, but let's not spend 3 days learning about it and bashing our heads against the wall. So that bought them time to then they used ed reports. They said, these are professionals that are trained, they understand what they're doing. Is it perfect? No. Is it good? It's pretty good. So they trusted ed reports to do some of that fine tuning when they narrowed their list down to 3 resources or 5 resources. It gives you a jump start. They then had that extra time available at their last day to design their professional learning plan for the following year. Teachers had buy-in, they had input on what that looked like, they wanted to do instructional rounds, they wanted to do classroom learning labs, they wanted learning from the publisher up front. So that time was saved by using some of the other resources. I bring that up because, as we said earlier, this work is messy. If you feel it's important to focus on the key shifts as an example, what's that most important work, and then use the evaluation tools, perfect, go for it. If you'd rather buy some time and use a resource that's not perfect but pretty good, like ed reports, then you can do that as well. But these are 2 different approaches that you can take using a vetting process. Okay. So that's a lot. We're going to turn it back to your table. Kelly, can you click forward 1? Give it back to you and your table. What connections are you making to your experiences previously, and what do you think might be best for the process specific to your context? Okay. So talk with your table team, and then we'll surface a few ideas for everybody. Enjoy.
Teachers or PD and said, here's the curriculum, so we don't want to do that because that's what they say. They don't like it, and they only use part of it, and some of it, and none of it.
All right. Recognizing that we have a lot of voices from across the state in this room, we would love to surface some of your thinking with your experiences. And what is this making you think? How has this shown up in your context? How could you imagine this happening? Just have a whole group discussion. Who might be willing to share first? Yeah.
Was just sharing, I wish I had this knowledge prior to this past year because our elementary math curriculum committee had to make a decision last month about what resource we're going to adopt, and it was a month earlier than we planned. And I felt like I went through all of those steps, but the one thing we were not able to do was pilot. And that's huge, right? We chose a resource, we're going to have to implement it and roll it out, and we never even got to pilot it.
Yeah. The more you know, right? So, yeah. And how many of us, have lived through experiences, whether it's in a classroom or in a district, and you're adopting new curriculum, and I don't remember once going through this type of a, in-depth process and thinking through, multiple perspectives and things. So, yeah. We're all positioned as learners. There's always ways to be better.
One thing I'm thinking about as I'm going through this process with the district right now as a literacy coach helping them look at new materials is that I want it to be perfect. Like I want to do right by them because in the past they were just given a new curriculum in August and said, teach this. But, just a reminder that it is messy. There are lots of different ways to do it that can be good. And to just keep that in mind that something is better than nothing, and the intent is good, to use the resources we have, and that alone is better than what they had in the past. So it's kind of remembering that.
Yeah, curriculum gives us kind of a lowest level of okay. And we're hoping that lowest level of okay is not quite down here, but up here, right, when we go through this process. And then also bringing back up the reading, we're hoping that to get to close as 100% implementation as possible, but leaving some wiggle room. It stated 60 to 80%, right? So we don't have to ditch everything that we know and love. We can still bring a piece of ourselves into it.
Well, one of the things we talked about was how important the vision and the vetting, but especially the vetting, is that question of how many instructional materials are being considered, but even what in that is being considered. If you have all this money, but you look at this curriculum and you want this part, and then they don't end up buying it, then it's not one of those things that you're like, okay, this is why we voted this in. So to really analyze, are we going to be able to spend our money on all these components? What components are we getting or not getting? and really vetting all that out and making that decision instead of just, oh yeah, we want this curriculum, but then choosing and piecemealing what is given to us.
For sure. Having that plan, step one, that plan. How much money do we have? What are our goals and our vision? And even going back to the vetting slide, what are those must-haves and those nice-to-haves? What must our curriculum come with, and what would be nice to have along with that? That really helps. If we go to Ed Reports, a lot of things are green across the board, right? That doesn't mean it's going to bring math or literacy to life in the way that you're hoping for it to. Who else?
So my first day, the first time I met my district, I was, hi, nice to meet you, I'm your new math coach. And the first thing out of their mouth was, we hate our curriculum and we want a new one. And so it was just really interesting because the curriculum director was pretty blindsided. She had no idea there was so many teachers that were disgruntled with the math curriculum and that they, quote unquote, hated it. So we spent this entire year kind of going through this process, and I'm like, this is my first day on the job. Where do I even begin? And I'm the only person. So I'm kind of affirmed that some of these things I've already put in place. So I'm like, okay, I've got a good process going. But we talked about at the table how you need to make sure that not only teachers have a must-have list, but your administration is clear about their must-haves. And we also included students. What are your must-haves? What are things that you value in the process? So we've looked at all of those must-haves to see where they align, where are they different, and how can we make sure that we have some middle ground to keep everybody on board.
Yeah, thanks for bringing students into that. As we think about, our leadership team or our selection team, we'll have administrators, we'll have teachers, we'll have other, demographics within the staff. What about our kids? What are they hoping for in their experience? Yeah, thank you. And as Marcus talked through two different ways, to kind of go through that vetting process and front loading the staff with some information and allowing them, to make more of the decisions, whereas Ed Reports has done that work for you. Sometimes using that third point, right, takes the emotion out a little bit. It takes away but I love these shiny pages a little bit. Yeah. Okay. So what is this? Yeah.
So when you brought that up, one thing I wanted to debate, because I'm working with a district right now, going through that. Thank you.
So we're going through that with a district right now in this process. And when you lifted student voice, I just want to thank you so much, because in this process of this district, it actually deterred what they thought they were going to even begin to pilot. So they kind of put that on the shelf because it didn't align with the student belief. So we have, as every time we come back together, we go back through what is our vision for high quality instruction, and what are our beliefs around high quality literacy, and what are our students' beliefs. And so we've been trying to carry that forward to each meeting, and it's hard. You have to be so intentional, but so thank you for lifting that. And I think interviewing a plethora of students, so we're just not hitting a certain population of student, but we do have all voices represented, was really important. Thank you.
And I think the follow-up conversation that you have with the teachers about what your students said during those interviews was incredibly powerful. They realized maybe it's not a curriculum problem, it's our instructional problem, and the way that the values that we are missing and seeking.
It's one of those thinking traps. Yeah. It's an adult learning problem. So as we have moved through the first few steps here, plan, vision, and vet, we can already see how the human aspect of it makes it, messier than just the 7 steps you write on the board. Okay. We'll continue to think that through as we move forward.
So the next portion, and probably the messiest, well, they're all pretty messy, is the pilot portion. There's always questions around how do we pilot. So you can see some of the questions up here. But most importantly, going back to what do we have to learn in order to make an informed decision? Often, districts will look at their vision, their math vision, and they'll take some questions and say, during our pilot, we have to get information about the instructional techniques, the use of representations, whatever it might be. So what do we have to learn? And then how are we gathering that data? So one district, another district we were in, they had around 30 questions, and they asked each teacher that was doing the pilot to fill out the 30 questions at the end of each week. And the teachers didn't love it, right? They didn't have voice in the process. So it just took a lot of time, and it was basically useless. Other districts have used, we're just going to focus on these 5 things. 2 of them are from our vision. 3 of them are from either the effective math teaching practices or the literacy practices, whatever they might be. So nail it down to something small, and one option is to gather data at the end of each week for teachers. In addition to that, going back to student voice, students have also been asked, which resource did you prefer and why? Which made it easier for you to understand and why? So thinking about all those different stakeholders in the process, how do we gather input from them? Knowing our data is not going to be perfect. If we just do each resource for 2 weeks, it's something, but it's not great. But at least we get, it prepares us to launch more effectively after trying it for a few weeks. So a few questions that come up. Who is going to pilot? They always ask, well, can my colleague across the hall do it? No. They don't have the same learning. They don't have the same vision. They don't have the same understanding of what we're looking for in a resource. So the answer is no to them. What we have done. Another part that came up was, the duration is always important, this last question here. There's not a great answer to that. It's really dependent on you and your context. Later on, when you all can access the slides, these are all hyperlinked, so if you want to see some of these, feel free to click on them. And one towards the end, in the comment section of this, I believe, is a report it's a framework from Tennessee, and they are really specific in their recommendations for pilot. They probably have 3 different pages of saying these are things to consider. So as you're looking through your pilot process, there's a resource in the slide deck it's a framework from Tennessee that could be helpful for you. We've done it as short as 2 weeks per resource. Another district has done 6 months, or half the year with one resource, half the year with the other resource. The teachers knew really clearly very early on when they did half the year with one resource and half the year with the other. They knew what they wanted. There was 100% consensus, and a lot of time was taken to get that decision. But 2 weeks feels really fast. The other recommendation and things that we've learned from, if Kelly and I are piloting, Kelly's not going to do resource A, and I'm going to do resource B, and then we're going to start to compare our notes and our data. Because Kelly's going to put her stake in the ground and say, this is my resource, and then we've just created a fight. Everybody in the pilot is doing the same amount of time with one resource, the same amount of time with the other resource, with common data being looked at the end. Okay. Still messy. Sounds clean in here, but it's still messy. So talk with your table group. What's important for you all, or what have you learned about a pilot process within your context?
Interesting. Like, we didn't like either one. That was a bad addition. So I like that he said it's like voting for the least. There's somebody, so.
Who might be willing to share a little bit about what their table talked about?
We have a pretty, I think it's a pretty good system we're following with our program evaluation tool and going through all these processes. In my role, I'm fortunate enough to go through it in many different subject areas. And we learn each time as we go through, but one thing that's important with when we do pilot, we do always pilot both materials that we have gone through vetted and use a different equipped rubric or whatnot. But making sure that teachers, when they go back to their buildings, understand that process that we've been going through. I think sometimes that communication could be made more clear, like this is what we've been doing, this is what we're doing, and the reason why, and having it be more visible. So I think that's something that we could improve upon.
Yeah, sure. That over communication, right? So you have your selection team, but then, everyone else is just kind of left hanging in the balance sometimes, it might feel like. So being really clear about what's happening and why it's happening.
What other ways have you all used to communicate regularly and create transparency in the process?
We have a Google Doc that our curriculum director used, and she has it set up to everybody, and she has like those little green, yellow, and red check boxes in the progress, and very transparent about, on this date, we're going to do this, and this is who was involved, and so they can always go back and see what steps have been taken, even if they weren't involved in it. And
click on the links, like every time we create a document, it's always the same.
When we think about managing change among humans, it's important to think about that connection, that competency, and that control. Okay, that kind of feels like that control piece. Like, or another way of thinking about it in my brain is, if I don't know what's happening, I make up that story, right? So managing the human piece of it feels almost as heavy as the whole curriculum process, right? People on the inside and the people on the outside.
Yeah, it's just surprising, I'm sure you've gone through this too, how many districts the teachers feel like they've been burned before. A lot of time is spent, they put in the energy, they put in the effort, they offer the recommendation, and somebody up the line chooses something else. It makes it really hard to rebuild that trust when those have been the experiences of the teachers. So transparency. We worked with a rural district outside of Grand Rapids. Yeah.
We worked with the rural district outside of Grand Rapids, and one thing that they wanted to do was let their leadership team develop the message after every meeting. What did we do today? What do we want to tell teachers? Where are we at in the process? So very similar, but we let the leadership team create it, and that they said that was one of the best parts that they could have done to recreate that trust. So we've got two different options right now, and I'm sure you have others, but transparency and trust, right? How often did we say that this morning? So that teachers can be vulnerable. So thank you for surfacing that.
There's a lot of nuances between literacy and math as well. I lived in the literacy world for a bit and can already tell you that math is a much straightforward process. Okay. We have less of the, well, I don't really care if it's not green on ed reports because I just really love it, right? Situation. So let's surface some of that too. Like, what are you hearing here? We've been talking a lot to the math world, and what are your experiences, and how might the two, literacy and math, we don't want to keep our worlds separate because we're here together today, right? These 2 days. But how might we learn from each other in those areas as well?
The content's different, but the process is still very similar. The people you talk with, the voices that are heard are still similar. The barriers may still be similar.
With literacy, there's so many components within your reader's workshop or writer. Like, there's so many different components with literacy that it's not a one-size-fits-all curricular resource. Like, you're really looking at many different things. So, whereas math, I feel like it is a little bit more choose bridges or something else. Mm-hmm. Where literacy, we're looking at so many different things. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And kind of the instructional format too. You mentioned a workshop. There's many different formats to our time together, and that would be something to include in the must-haves or nice-to-haves, as far as a checklist of what do we want, our vision, what do we want our instructional time to look like.
Yeah, I think maintaining a focus on research and best practices is across both. We have the math practices now and the literacy practices that actually aren't reflected in the ed reports, so kind of as, for coaches that are here to be able to bring that piece into it, what does the research say just about best instructional practices kind of over content?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So when we think about, choosing 3 to 5 curricular tools to look more closely at, we want to choose those green ones on ed reports possibly, but then how could we compare them to the literacy essentials or the math essentials and use that as some of our criteria in selecting a high quality resource? Yeah.
Piggybacking off of that, there really are 2 different cells, because typically you're trying to sell, if you're trying to sell an ELA program, you're dealing with philosophies. For math, everyone just thinks, it's really a lot of all best, keeping best practice research, and that's when you're thinking that and selling that, because it's 2 different deals.
Mm-hmm. So it feels like we're going back to that clarity piece again. Who's making the decision and how's the decision going to be made? What's the criteria we're using to select these resources? We're going to use research. We're going to use third points. It's going to be really hard to set aside our feelings and our philosophies entirely, but we can't rely entirely on that. Yeah, we have to be really clear on what that process looks and sounds like.
I'm bringing this up, I don't know if anyone was in there. Tanya Wright spoke to the coaches virtually, I think it was back in October, and so if someone was there who was helping me get my numbers right. But she said that there was a survey recently done in Michigan about ELA curriculum. And so I had some head nods, good, so I don't remember this. But we can go through all this process, but what was very telling about the survey was, even though there are approved programs, I think it was the amount of research-based programs that are being approved by school boards and what we believe are being enacted in school districts wasn't in reality what teachers were implementing in their classrooms. There was a lot more theory-based, I believe in levels, I believe in cueing, I believe in, like, this just, they were pushing back on the science of reading and doing what they felt was best. So even though a district might have approved programs and approved, and I forget the number, but it was astronomical how many, the disconnect between what we have on paper with what is actually happening in the classrooms.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Remember that?
Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, it's an epic.
Yeah, like I got some donuts.
It was her epic survey.
Yeah.
They briefed that.
Yes, thank you. It was her policy brief. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And when we think about the implement and monitor, how are we monitoring in a way to know that we are hitting that 60 to 80% implementation with fidelity and integrity? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I do feel that is coming in math now too, because we have historically taught procedures, algorithms, and now some of our math is more inquiry based and that sort of thing. So what we're doing, we're looking at new math curriculum. So what we're doing is we're starting with our team really digging into the essentials. Because they need that learning, they need that knowledge before they go into selecting a curriculum. And if we were to just pick a curriculum based on that, then the teachers would be supplementing other things in place of it, like someone else mentioned. The teachers are not going to follow it if they.
We'd still be having mad minutes or fact tests. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure. So as we're considering our learning around the organizational practices and how we elevate and continue our process of learning and growing in our systems, also how are we using the other documents in order to support this process as well? How are we hanging our hats on those essentials?
Thank you. And then, so for the final day, how do we select? Once again, going back to reminding the group how the decision is going to be made, and then having a pretty tight protocol on how we're all going to vote and what we're going to do with the data that we see. It's easy to fall into the trap of just having a conversation like this about bridges, and then math expressions, and then illustrative, and then we just kind of hash it out, whole group. Well, we know we end up responding to the loudest voices in the room. So one protocol that's used is the focusing for process. We've used it through adaptive schools. Many of you are probably familiar with it. You look at the pilot data and any data that the team has gathered on this last day, and you brainstorm themes based on data. So this is an individual process. What are you noticing about the data? Brainstorm individually, write on Post-it notes, get as messy as we can, and then put it up for all of us to see. Next step in the process is clarify. So I'm not sure what that Post-it means. Can someone say more about that? Right? And then we have conversation around that because we're really generating that common understanding. Okay, so once we have common understanding of the data that's projected, then it's the time to advocate. And this feels weird for teachers. We just don't know how to advocate very well for ourselves. So giving sentence stems can be helpful too. But each person, we go around the room, each person has a chance to advocate for what resource they want and why. And then lastly, you write it down on a Post-it note, you turn it in, and then we stack it up and we say, this is your group's data. What does this mean to you? And often that can feel like a sticking point, because if you've got 80% or 90% but not 100, someone's going to have to give up their first choice, right? And we just hope that we're professional enough, and if we can get ahead of that and letting people know, you probably love one of these and you might not get your first choice. But are you going to stand behind the group's decision to move forward in this way? We always end with everybody giving some form of a verbal or visual support of the resource that has been adopted. It's a really tense moment, and there's feels like there's relief once that final decision is made, however. But that's the easy work. It's the implementation that's hard. But focusing for might be a protocol to consider when you're selecting on that final day. If you have time, this is really valuable. It just, for those that are in central office or building leadership, if you can get voice from that leadership team around what professional learning they want, you just give it right back to them. You know that they need it, but if they ask for it, it feels much better. It's more digestible. And then what's going to happen next is we're going to have Erica and Mary share some resources for literacy on how do we really evaluate what materials we need in addition to the core resource here, or the core instructional materials. Okay. Kelly, can you click? As we go into the install phase, so at this point we've decided, we know what our professional learning plan looks like. Oh, thank you. That's right. So one thing that teachers have found to be really helpful, I'm not sure if anyone uses Reveal in here, Reveal Math. Reveal is a good resource. It's a great resource, but there's so many components to it. I think it's probably more similar to what you all deal with in the literacy world. Reveal has so many components, and teachers are overwhelmed. They feel like this giant wave has just crushed them, and they're not sure where to begin once it's time to teach this resource. So it's great, but make it bite-sizable. So this, something that's been attempted, and since we're in the business of working with humans, we want to make it, they want to do a good job. All teachers and all educators, we want to do a good job, but we don't want to throw too much on their plate too fast. So what's the one thing that we're all going to do, we're all going to learn about and do this year really well? So we've been working with Godwin Heights for a number of years, and we said, you all adopted Bridges. Fantastic. Works for you. Great. We're all going to learn about Number Corner this year. And the reason we're just focusing on Number Corner is so we can learn what it means to be a facilitator of student understanding. So all teachers will be doing at least 20 minutes of Number Corner a day, with the focus on using the representations and asking questions. It's 20 minutes of their math block, and most of the professional learning was centered just on Number Corner. Teachers throughout the year felt so much more confident in Number Corner because we focused just on Number Corner. Workplaces? Not yet, but at least the district said, you don't have to be a master in workplaces. Right now we're learning about Number Corner, and teachers felt that relief and they felt appreciated and seen, so they could find their confidence here and feel like they were doing a good job. So what is your gold standard for year one implementation? What's that bite-sized piece that we're all going to wrap our arms around and do a really good job with? And then what's an unacceptable variation? Yeah, but I do Number Corner. I just don't do anything with workplaces because that's not our focus this year. District said that's not okay. You have to do something with workplaces. You just don't have to be a master at it. Dabble, learn, and try before we cross it off the list. You all know that you have the rock star teachers who are just going to crush it with Number Corner on day 5, right? What's next for them? Those are your front runners for workplaces and other spaces. Don't slow them down. They're already at that gold standard. An acceptable variation is you get going with workplaces. We'll have some coaching supports for you. Your PLCs, if you all are comfortable with that, we can shift those to workplaces instead. So think about those different tiers of teachers that you have and what supports that they need. New teachers, you stick with Number Corner. We're just going to support the heck out of you, and you're going to do a good job there. Short story, make it bite-sizable for teachers so they can feel confident and that like they're doing a good job with the resource. Continue to build momentum. Okay. Thank you. Kelly, can you explain what this document is, how Godwin has used it?
Yeah, so I've had the opportunity to do some coaching with Godwin this year as a part of their year 3 of implementation. And year 1, they were doing Number Corner. Now year 3, they're feeling really good with even their tier 1 instruction. And some of their math lead team is like, let's dive into that intervention value, right? So that feels fun. This document is used each year to describe the expectations of teachers, what's okay and what's not okay, and also the purpose of why we're doing what we're doing. Going back to that vision and those underlying beliefs, that's what we hang our hat on. This is their version of that. This is the why, and these are the expectations around it. Bridges lessons must be taught 5 days per week. If an administrator walks in the room and sees teachers pay teachers, that's not okay. We know that that's not okay.
All their professional learning is launched through this document as well. So you get feedback from teachers saying, we're really struggling with models and strategies. Great. We start the professional learning by revisiting this document and saying, you all said you want support with models and strategies. Teachers feel like they're heard and they're affirmed and they get what they need. So start every meeting, get that voice from teachers and what their students are telling them they need.
We're also using these expectations, most of them fit, with coaching cycles. So let's choose one of these that we want to dive deeper into. What is that goal for our students and how are we going to work towards it? Makes it easy to make that learning concrete.
Yeah. Can I just ask, was this a team collaborative thing? Like they all worked together to create the expectation document, or was this like principals came up with the expectations?
Yeah, Godwin specifically, they gave their teachers a lot of voice, but the central office made the decision. Okay, so you're offering recommendations. But their leadership was in the room through all of the days, so they had the common understanding, and they went with the recommendation of the teachers. Principals, a little iffy, right? Principals didn't attend as regularly, so central office knew that was their heavy lift. How do we get principals on board with what this means and what does it look like and how do we support it regularly? That was the challenge. The teachers were in.
Once we get past the installation and we implement it for a little bit of time, we need to see what are those holes. And we're going to hand it over to Mary and Erica.
Hi, everyone. We'll just begin by reintroducing ourselves really quickly. I am Erica Rodriguez-Hatt, and I work with early literacy at Washtenaw ISD and also coaching initiatives. Prior to that, I worked in a fairly large district, Ann Arbor Public Schools, as their ELA coordinator and social studies coordinator. So just giving you that relevant point because that is where I did a lot of my work with curriculum and implementation. And Mary?
Okay, I'm Mary Johnson, just from Muskegon Area ISD. So prior to this, I was an instructional coach within a local district within our county. And, you know, like many of you, you're wearing many, many hats. And in that role, I was coaching, and I was also became an interventionist because there was this high need. So we kind of did both of those. And then I was in the 5th grade classroom for 15 years, which was absolutely my favorite. So, and I think I became that spotlight for our superintendent who said, we're looking at new curriculum for social studies. Mary, you ready to go? Absolutely, let's go. So any opportunity I had to engage in practices, I appreciated. And what I really appreciated about my leadership of my superintendent and / our curriculum director is he was doing a lot of these processes before we started talking about it, right? So it's really nice that I was vetted in a system that really was immersed in this level and depth to bring in curriculum into a district and think about what does it look like on an ongoing basis? What does it look like on monitoring? Which Marcus and Kelly are going to give us some conversations on that.
So we are going to be using a specific tool to talk to you today. And that tool is at your table in an envelope, but we're not going to open those up just yet. And if you happen to not have an envelope, we'll fix that problem when we get to the point of opening the envelope. And then before I hand it over to Mary to start, I just want to go back to the excerpt from Schmoker that we read, because as we were reading, it really reminded us about how this is connected to the resource examination tool. As Marcus said, this is the time throughout that first year when you're discovering that there are gaps. And sometimes it takes a little bit longer depending on the curriculum and the level of, or the depth of knowledge that someone may have. But I just wanted to go back to page 33 in this little excerpt and go back to that space where it says this common curriculum. It's at the end of the first paragraph. This common curriculum might constitute 60 to 80% of the material taught by teachers of the same course. So, you know, that sentence right there can mean quite a few things, but at surface level, at just knowing that there are variances between teachers and that there are teachers need different supports, and students themselves one year may come in needing more of something. Teachers, coaches, administrators are always looking for and pulling in tools. And so how do we make sure that those tools that we're pulling in are appropriate, are the correct tools? And Mary's going to go into that.
So we're going to start out, and I had shared with Erica a little story, and she's like, you need to share it. I said, okay, I will. So when I think about this, and we think about the resource examination tool, I'll tell you a little bit about the history in a moment, but it made me start to think about all of us in this room, and we probably have been there before. There's always these, and they talked about it this morning, I believe too, about the bright, shiny object that comes walking in. Or I could say the word science of reading right now, and I see you shaking your head, saying, yep, that's, and so there's a plethora of things. So even if you Google, if I'm a teacher and I'm Googling the science of reading underneath Google Scholar, there's 6 million different possibilities. So if I start to think about that, how overwhelming is that for a teacher, especially in elementary, teaching many content areas? You know, maybe they're teaching all the content. So how do we make it manageable, and how do we make sure that we are having some coherence? So thank you, Kelly and Marcus, for that, and consistency across there. So one pathway I want to share with you is a district story. This district took charge of their Tier 1 and said we wanted to have equity for all of our students and have common experiences. They had a lot of twins for whatever reason one year, and they thought, if my child is in teacher A and the other child's in teacher B, are they having common experiences? What does that feel like? So when they were implementing their new curriculum, they were kind of excited about it, because that was a little bit in the back burner about the twins. So many in that water out there. But anyways, when they started to look at that prior, they were using many different resources. Again, teachers looking at their students saying, I need to help fill an area of need for my children that I'm serving. And everyone's doing with the best interest, right? Unfortunately, what they found is there was like 16 different ELA options that were being offered within their district, not having common experience, not equitable. So that past is kind of like their possibilities. When they took inventory, that's what they were finding. When they made the decision to go with a solid Tier 1 coherent clarity program for their ELA instruction, they are in year 3. What they have noticed this year is that the need has been for them, actually year 4, the need has been their current program did not have a solid small group instruction. And they felt like it was students doing a lot of worksheets outside of the teacher table. So what they did is they did a lot of research, and they said, what does it look like at a teacher table, and what does it look like for students out there? They basically were running through the resource examination tool, which we'll look at with you in a moment. And that way they had common learning together, and they had consistency. Now they're looking at their data, and the data is just, it's amazing what is starting to happen for that district. So let's move ahead. Oh, I want to share the history a little bit with you too. Sorry about that. So the history of this document, how this came to life, is in our Literacy Statewide Coaching Network. There was this opportunity, if you wanted to be a part of it, to look at a writing resource, because in ELA, there's this writing component and standards, and sometimes it's hard to find a program. And so we wanted to look at a program, and as we were doing that, we had a conversation as a group. How are we analyzing a resource? How do we look at that resource and bring it into a district and maybe put it on top of what they're already utilizing? So we were challenged by Dr. Susan Lale. So some of you in the coaching network, you know who she is, and I see those smiles. And she always brings that highest quality of learning together. She wanted to empower us to put our thinking down on paper. So many of us do our day-to-day operation, but she was asking us now to capture what did we do and what did that look like systematically. So we're going to share that with you in a moment, but that's kind of the history, and we have a network about 400, 500 coaches that have gone through that and had a chance to give us some feedback on it. So Erica, we're ready for the next part. All right, so before we start to look at the resource examination, I want to just invite you, Erica and I do, just to talk with an elbow partner real quickly. Process maybe for a minute, or you can just jump right into having conversations. What are your experiences with curriculums right now, programs, curriculum resources? So think about a principal called me the other day, said, Mary, I have a teacher came to me and they're wanting me to do this resource now. Is this a quality resource? Does it align to the standards? Is it aligned to evidence-based practices? So think about like resources that are brought to you in addition to your curriculum pieces. What are some processes you go through right now? So just turn to an elbow partner and maybe talk about what has been your experience currently or in the past. So turn and talk.
Right. Yeah.
Here's two options. Take a look at what the publisher sent us.
Yeah.
And just pick,
Yeah.
you know.
Look at the checklist of things.
So sorry to cut you off so soon. We want to make sure we don't run over, and we were short 10 minutes. So I imagine that in your conversations you were kind of having similar feelings that some of the coaches in the statewide network were having, which was, that there are curricular resources being suggested all around, and this tremendous amount of pressure on maybe coaches or anyone in leadership to make a decision on whether or not that tool should be brought in as a curricular resource or as a tool to support learning. So that's another piece to how this was created, and that's how we want to sort of launch looking at the tool, imagining that people are bringing forward tools to you, resources to you, and they want to know how to move forward. You want to know how to move forward. And you want to make sure to keep that cohesiveness and to give voice to your teachers, to your coaches, or whoever it is that's bringing the resource forward. Sometimes it's even a superintendent or someone even more removed, I guess, from the classroom that is suggesting something. And we, again, want to make sure we have a way of having a critical lens and not just going for pretty packages or, buzzwords like science of reading that can really be stuck on to anything. So Mary is going to... Yes, Mary is going to, once you find your envelope, and each of you take one examination tool. It is in this booklet format.
So here's your envelope, and it says, please don't open yet. Now is the
Yes.
So if you want to open that, and there should be 6 at your table. Thank you. And we would encourage you that you can write on this. We can get more copies. You will have links to this. Marcus and Kelly put it all together.
So we'll be ready. So I want to invite you on the front part of the resource examination tool. And again, I do encourage you to write. I know it's so hard, or maybe I wish we had sticky notes so you could do that as well. But on the front part is the paragraph. So again, going back to the history, this was for our literacy coaches, but you could really substitute fosters opportunities for administrators, for district leaders, curriculum directors, building principals, teachers, teacher leaders, leadership teams, that you could utilize this tool. So what this tool really, the outbirth of this tool, was to help districts or help our coaching network so often being faced, should we bring this resource in, like UFly? I'm just going to name that. So that's a resource right now that is really hot out there. Should we bring in that UFly for our Tier 1 phonics instruction? And so I heard about it, or I read about it, or my neighbor talked to me in a neighboring district. Is this something that would fit for our district, right? Or maybe it's something else, like Haggerty or something. Or it could be... this did happen, a teacher-pay-teacher program, because that was curriculum, when it was presented to this person. We all know that's not curriculum, right? Anyways, so what I wanted to share with you, what I've heard is using this third point has really helped when a resource comes in or because a teacher's excited when they find something to bring in, right? Or who's ever bringing it. So you don't want to take that excitement and lower it. So what we want to do is maybe use a third point for this. So I'm going to invite you to open it up. And I'm going to kind of walk you through this pretty quickly. If we look at the top, the resource examination tool, it says proposed resource. Please keep in mind that proposed resource, it could be a podcast. It could be a book study. It could be, just a lot of practice, instructional evidence-based practice. It could be an article. It could be a multitude of things. Do you see where it says considerations prior to analysis? So what we were doing in that group this summer is we were trying to think of what are all the things we need to consider. It was so refreshing this morning to hear Dr. Resnick, I believe I said her name correctly, really lift this as well. Here's some considerations to think about. Who selected the resource? What data informed the decision? Who is the audience? What is the overall purpose? And you can read the bullets underneath there. And what is the proposed format of learning, right? So kind of having those discussions ahead of time and to really lean into that to kind of determine is this something that would make most meaning for us right now as a staff or for the staff, or is it for a grade level? Is it a PLC? Who are we looking at? And then once that is decided, you'll notice there's a booklet that says Coach Analysis Resource, analyzes the resource. Can I lift to you? The coaches for the state of Michigan for literacy are so powerful. They have deep, deep training. They can be utilized as a resource to help in this area. However, that doesn't just have to be coaches. It can be your leadership team. It could be a team sitting around. But bringing in, if you have a literacy leadership or literacy coach, they definitely have a lot of deep knowledge that can support you when you're looking at that resource and might have some information to support too. So then once we get to that middle level, once the analysis is done, then it's like determine the reasons and or goals for this choice. So what we wanted to lift there in that middle column is we said, okay, so what do we want to look to see if it's aligned to? I want to preface this, it doesn't have to align to everything, okay? It was whatever your purpose was for choosing that resource. So maybe in that situation, I was using that particular resource, UFly, the district said, we don't have a phonics program. So right now, we have all of our teachers using whatever they're selecting and choosing. So you might end up going through that to say, does this align to our building and district continuous improvement plan? Is that our goal? Is it aligned to our instructional goals? Does it bring equity and align to our vision for equity in our district? Is it aligned to the standards? Is it aligned to the essential evidence-based practices? So there's choices there that you can, choose one box, two boxes, none of the boxes. But it's just something to give you a level. When we were having conversations, Erica and myself, we were thinking about this. This is the power piece that when Marcus and Kelly are talking about curriculum adoption, in that year one, individual teachers start to realize pieces that are missing. Like there might not be that writing practice. There might not be that explicit phonics instruction that we were hoping that it would have. We thought we saw it in there, but we didn't see it. You might then use a resource like this so that collectively you build teacher efficacy, that everyone can come around and say, okay, let's look at this resource together. It's made it through the vetting process here. Now, what will professional learning look like? So just want to lay that out there because so often we hear, and I know, Marcus, I'm not going to steal your thunder or Kelly's, but the critical part of implementing becomes that monitoring. And teachers will continue to notice, okay, we're noticing that our curriculum might be missing this component, or maybe it's just a little tweak in a practice to really elevate student learning. So with that, Erica.
Yeah, I would like to add right here when we are at the alignment piece that there are resources that you use to look for this alignment. And we've actually, on the back of the booklet, we've actually included some of those pieces, not all, but some. And so we have the standards, which are right there, and the essentials. But we felt like the essentials themselves, the essential documents, were not laid out in a way that was necessarily conducive to doing this kind of check with a team. And so we do have a tool there. You can scan the QR code. And this was also printed before some changes were made. So the tool itself has a little bit different name, but it is there to help you review a resource by using the essentials. Now, if you are reviewing a writing tool, you are not going to use all the essentials to do that. You're going to go to Essential 6, which is the writing essential, and you're going to use it there. And really, this is meant for you to have a conversation with your team. Again, understanding that the collaborative process is best for everyone, going back to the organizational practices. So we do have these resources here, and there are other resources for some of the other alignments. For example, there isn't one that's shared widely at this point, but there are tools out of New York for culturally responsive teaching. There's also tools, and obviously the alignment to curriculum or instructional goals for your district. That's going to be the district improvement plan. That's going to be MyKIP. So again, this seems like a lot to align, but you wouldn't necessarily need to look at all these pieces when you are looking at one particular tool. So just wanted to say that, and so feel free to go to those spaces. Okay, so as you're moving down this, you could call it a decision tree. As you're moving down, after you do the alignment piece, you're going to ask yourself the question about whether or not there are concerns or reservations regarding the use of the tool in question. And you'll have two outcomes to that. It's either going to be yes, there are concerns, or no, there are not concerns. If there are not concerns, then you would move on to next steps, where I'm going to explain that in just a bit of what that means. If there are concerns, and many times, I'm sure you've heard this over and over, that no tool is perfect. So sometimes the concern is minimal, and sometimes it's pretty big. But then you go into making sure that you're sharing those concerns with the person who brought the tool forward, or the people that are making the decision about whether the tool is being used. So I have some quick examples. And this actually I've heard for a lot of districts, but I'm thinking of one in particular, that there was, the district had a phonics curriculum. And within the phonics curriculum, there was an expectation that there was going to be a phonological awareness component. And unfortunately, there was not. And so a tool was selected by recommendation of a neighboring district. And unfortunately, once the district selected the tool, they actually got an email from one of the big researchers in the area that said, can you return that? And unfortunately, they could not return that. And it was because there was the tool, even though it was a phonological awareness tool, was not aligned to the phonics instruction that was happening. And we know that the phonics instruction and phonological awareness instruction need to follow a scope and sequence that's tied together, or that makes sense. And so they had already selected that, so they couldn't really go back to the top. They knew at this point that what this would look like is that they moved forward, right? They have to. And so the next steps for them was getting in contact with Laura Tortorelli from MSU, and she helped them align it. So that was one way in which their tool at the bottom went through this process. Then what happened at the coaching network, a tool was selected for K2 because the 3.5 tool was excellent. Once it got into our hands, we realized the K2 tool did not
turn out the way the 3.5 tool did. We saw some problems with, I believe, standards a little bit, and also one of the other concerns we had was allotted time and feeling as if it was almost geared still to 3 through 5 students. And so we, at that point, we said no to the decision, and we went back up to the top. Again, if we had said yes, we would have figured out a way for that tool to work with us, and that might have been, we actually brainstormed because we felt like the tool was dense, maybe sharing sketch notes with the teachers as they were going through it, or maybe only having them read a section of the book. So that's how these two pieces work here at the end, that you want to make sure, once the alignment is done, that you share what you found, what the concerns were, and that you either start over or make sure that there is a solid plan for moving forward. There is actually another pretty popular curriculum, and actually it got past me, to tell you the truth, a couple years ago, because it was recommended really highly by a lot of, it's actually some researchers that I actually respect a lot. But then within my own county, our vision for equity is very strong. And one of the teachers actually noticed that all the books that were included, all the trade books, they actually were inclusive of different, or they were representative. However, none of them were written by authors from that particular group. And so for them, it was not a deal breaker because they felt like they could create their own text sets of trade books. So for them, the next steps felt minimal, whereas for another curriculum they were looking at, the problem was the ideology behind how to teach a particular, basically it was sticking with a curriculum that had, I'm trying not to say the curriculum, sticking with a curriculum that was really focused on picture cues versus looking at words and decoding them. And so that was a big no-no to them, so they did not feel like they had the expertise to fix that. So that's kind of how you run through this. Mary, would you add anything?
So the one thing I will just wrap us up so that we can finish up here, Kelly and Marcus. One thing I would just recommend with this tool, I heard from a principal and a coach when they've used it. What's really been helpful is, Kelly, you named it several times, humanity, right? So when teachers are running in with that resource, or if somebody else is running in with that resource, there's already a lot of passion behind that. They've done that research, right? And so what they've liked about the resource examination tool, they've been able to use this as a third point, because then that way it's not my opinion versus your opinion, or your belief versus my belief, but how could we go through this together to really vet it? And in that situation, they were able to go through a resource that was wanting to be brought forth from that teacher to the rest of the teaching staff of 50, and the principal and her went through this together, and they made a decision, yeah, this isn't the right time, and this isn't the best resource to fill our need. And they were able to use a third point. So it honored the teacher, that humanity side, because again, just trying to fill that need that was there, and she was researching, trying to find something. So noticing, we would always love feedback. If you try this, how did it go? Think about year 1, think about year 2, year 3. We all know, I know Marcus and Kelly will talk about it. It's those years where people start to veer away from a program, and then all that hard work and that investment kind of go awry. So I am going to wrap it up. And if you have questions, Erica and I will stick around afterwards. And I'm going to let Marcus and Kelly, are you ready?
Can I just make a quick note while you come up that Mary already said this, but just to remind you that the first iteration of this piece of work was for coaches. That's why you see the reference to coaches on the front and also in that little book. But you would just remember that it's anyone that's in leadership and has the ability to or has enough knowledge, and even if they don't, to bring someone in that has enough knowledge to sort of run through these and use the tools.
Thanks, Erica and Mary. It feels powerful, and thank you for conveying the message that we're moving away from individual choices and really making sure we're leveraging the collective understanding of the group to make the best decisions for the kids. So to wrap up, we don't want to skip, but I know we talked a lot about the adoption process and not as much about the monitoring plan. There are several ways to do that, and one that we're stealing from Godwin Heights in Grand Rapids Public Schools is they leverage their leadership team and they establish monthly meetings to say, how's implementation going? Are we all focusing on number corner like we're supposed to? They share with their grade level lead. That grade level lead then knows to report to their instructional leader at the end of each month, and then that instructional leader caters the professional learning supports. So sometimes they do classroom learning labs, sometimes we help coach, sometimes we have early release, and we use that early release time. So whatever that method is, how do we structure that communication from the teachers and what their needs are to make sure that we're responding appropriately with the resources? One way is to leverage a leadership team. Another, sometimes central office and principals like to just send usually monthly emails and saying, what common assessment are you on right now? What unit are you finishing up? Right? So how are we just getting more information from the teachers to know what actually is taking place in the classroom, and then how do we respond accordingly? Because if we don't monitor and we don't respond, we don't help teachers, they get grumpy and then they don't use the resource anymore, and all the hard work and all the money falls flat. Okay. So that was the crash course in adopting and implementing new instructional materials. There are a few resources here. Feel free, or please reach out if you have any questions in regards to literacy or math. We're happy to collaborate and share some ideas with you, but we appreciate your time this afternoon. Thanks, everybody.